Where else would you rather be? I'm Paul Clifford, CEO of the Penn State Alumni Association. Welcome to the People of Penn State. Each week on the podcast, you can expect to hear the voices of Penn Staters talking about what they're passionate about, and you can expect to feel the pride and the power of the Penn State network. And today we have another great story to pass along to you. We are talking with Christina Parle. She is an equity, inclusion, and diversity educator and consultant with her company, Social Responsibility Speaks, and she previously served as the Director of Chapter Services and Conduct for Zeta Beta Tau Fraternity. Christina is the 2023-2024 President of the Association for Student Conduct Administration, and much of her work is rooted in unlearning, conflict resolution, and effective communication. Christina's particular interest is in language and its impacts. She has specific experience in behavioral conduct, curriculum writing, leadership education, and is coming to you today from Kansas City, Missouri, with her dog Nugget. Her love of music and of the theater, especially Hamilton, and we are so excited to have a self-proclaimed TV show enthusiast with us today on the podcast. Welcome, Christina Parle, to the People of Penn State. How are you today?
Doing well. How are you, Paul?
I am fantastic. I'm looking forward to this conversation. Let's start at the very beginning. How did you become a Penn State Nittany Lion?
Oh, goodness. Wow. Okay. So I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Central Missouri. I studied criminal justice and political science, and I really intended to go and do law enforcement work, and then ended up finding higher education and student affairs as a really involved undergraduate student. So then when I went to school about 45 minutes away from home. And so when I was going to apply for grad schools, I was like, get me out of the Midwest, anywhere but here. And so I applied to 9 schools all over the country and got into 7. And Penn State was one of the campuses that I was able to come visit and do a preview days, see the campus, meet the faculty, meet other potential students, and also interview for a graduate assistantship on the campus. And I actually came in the middle of like a huge snowstorm. So didn't really get to see a lot of things, but was able to meet amazing people. And one of the assistantships that I interviewed for was in the Office of Student Conduct. And my background was, again, in criminal justice, political science, all the things. My life has really been rooted in accountability. And so I selected that as my assistantship over a few other opportunities on different campuses across the nation. And there I was, being a Nittany Lion that following fall. So yes.
That's amazing. You're a fellow College of Education grad. I got my master's in higher education in 2020. As a student beyond your graduate assistantship, what other things were you involved
in? That's a good question. So I also did practicum in the Paul Robeson Cultural Center. And then, of course, was heavily involved in just my studies. And then I worked in the Office of Student Conduct in the same year that Danny Shehay took over as the director of sorority and fraternity life as well. So he was kind of in this dual role. So I also had the great privilege and opportunity to work with sororities and fraternities. So I was the National Panhellenic, which is the Divine Nine historically Black fraternities and sororities, and the MGC, the Multicultural Greek Letter Council advisor. So that was in my last year at the institution, but in my free time, if you can call it that, I advised my sorority, Sigma Kappa. So I started off, I think, helping with the PR chair and then, helped with recruitment here and there, but eventually became their advisory board supervisor. So their main advisor, and spent a lot of time with the chapter there.
So you mentioned that you're Sigma Kappa, and yet your professional experience was with Zeta Beta Tau Fraternity. Talk about, compare and contrast the two organizations and how was there kind of rivalries? I know that there is kind of closely held traditions of our fraternities and sororities. And what was it like to work for another one?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So, Sigma Kappa, of course, is a women's organization. Right. So I was able to work a lot in that space. And I think at that time, I didn't have a lot of contextual knowledge of the larger sorority and fraternity community, other than really basic interactions with them. So my knowledge of Zeta Beta Tau at the time was just not really significant. Now, of course, I understood that there are other groups and they have different things, but when I was there at Penn State, I wasn't engaging with those folks as much, although I was with the culturally based fraternities and sororities. So when I went to work for ZBT, I feel like it really broadened my horizon and understanding, right, of the larger community, and actually got to work with the ZBT chapter at the Penn State campus at University Park. So that was really cool to be able to come back a couple of different times and see campus, see people, but also get to do my job, really. And so that was exciting in that space.
Those of us who work in higher education are familiar with the Divine Nine, but some of our listeners might not be. Can you talk a little bit about those fraternities and sororities?
Yeah. So, of course, the organization that I'm a part of is a member of a Panhellenic organization, which have been historically white serving institutions or organizations that eventually, of course, opened up their doors to all kinds of people of different races, cultures, ethnicities, sexual orientation, all different kinds of things. But there are historically Black fraternities and sororities. There's 9 of them called the Divine Nine, and they have served historically Black individuals. They similarly have opened up their doors to all different people of, races and ethnicities. But that community in particular was really cool to get to work with, because there's just such a cultural piece there, a traditional piece there, that I think you lose sometimes in the IFC and Panhellenic spaces, partially because IFC and Panhellenic, there are just so many of their chapters across the nation that they show up differently across the different campuses. Whereas the Divine Nine, it's cool because if I go to Penn State and see one of their chapters, or if I go to Pittsburgh and see one of their chapters, they're going to have some really deep ties to their culture and traditions. And then, of course, working with the Multicultural Great Council was cool because I got to work with Latin-based groups. I got to work with Asian-based groups. I got to work with Muslim-based groups. And so there was a lot of things to learn, cultures to engage with, curiosity to engage with folks and how they show up and what they need in those spaces.
We see this phenomena, obviously, in higher education, where our student leaders get so engaged that they choose to pursue it as a profession, right? A profession that nobody grows up playing in the sandbox, dreaming of doing, and yet a fire gets lit through a student experience, through an advisor. When you came to Penn State, what was the specific career trajectory that you saw yourself on? Was it on the student affairs leadership? Did you eventually want to go to the route of maybe being a university president? What is the area of higher education that kind of lights your fire?
Yeah, that's a great question. And funny that you said university president, because when I was in undergrad, I had a very close relationship with my university president, Dr. Charles Ambrose. And he was so good to me. He put me in spaces and places that I could learn and grow and develop, specifically, in student affairs, but also just as a person. So he really helped me on my graduate school journey, kind of deciding where to go, where to, even show interest or kind of look into. And so I just knew I was going to be a university president at some point. And so I was in the honors college at the University of Central Missouri, and my thesis, as I was exiting my honors thesis, was actually about the pathway to the presidency. And so I was super fortunate to do research around presidents and their background and a typical trajectory for people who became presidents of colleges or universities. I even got the opportunity to interview a couple or few university or college presidents. And so I think that's where I thought I was going to end up. And then, of course, worked on a couple of different campuses and just found myself not experiencing what I thought I would on those campuses or in those experiences. And so ended up looking into the headquarters experience, because when I left Penn State, I went to work at Western Carolina University as a sorority and fraternity advisor, where I got to advise all of the different councils, all of the different chapters. And so I had that experience. And then I went to the University of Kansas and went back to working in student conduct, where I got to work with individual students, but also got to do the student organization misconduct. So when, chapters, student organizations had issues around misconduct, I got to kind of facilitate that process. So then I had these two really cool experiences that I was able to marry and then go to the headquarters of a fraternity and support the experiences at that level.
It's amazing. Cullowhee, North Carolina, I believe.
North Carolina.
Western Carolina University up in the mountains. A beautiful, beautiful part of the state, beautiful part of our country. You said something earlier in the podcast that I found very interesting. You said my life has been rooted in accountability.
Yeah.
Where were the seeds planted for that? And tell me kind of like, what does that mean to you when you say my life's been rooted in accountability?
Yeah. I've got a really great mom is where I will start, who very much held me accountable for every decision that I made, right? If I messed up, we were going to talk about it. She wasn't going to like yell at me and tell me I was terrible. She was going to say, let's talk about this decision that you made, and not talk at me, but rather like really kind of push me to engage in a conversation about my behavior and how it was good or bad or not great. I remember situations of her like having me go in and talk to teachers when I would like do things that I wasn't supposed to be doing or wasn't showing up academically the way I should. She'd like make me go in and talk to them. And so I think a lot of that stems from my relationship with my mom. And I'm very fortunate, I think, to be in that space and place, to have somebody who required me to be accountable for my actions. But then just in general, from a very young age, I wanted to be a police officer. I don't remember like having really significant experiences with police officers growing up, positive or negative or anything like that. But that was a trajectory that I was absolutely on. And so quick little story, when I went to the University of Central Missouri, as most people do, you take an intro to your major class. So I was in an intro to policing class, and Dr. Betsy Kreisel, love her, she had us either shadow a police officer, like go on a ride along, or shadow an attorney. And so I was like, I want to go with police officers. And so I ended up on a ride along in Kansas City, actually, with the Kansas City Police Department. And of course, I wasn't able to get out. Like when things would happen, we'd go to calls, but I kind of had to watch from afar. Well, then I got lucky enough, hopefully this doesn't get any police in trouble, but then I got lucky enough that there was a shoplifting call at a Kmart, kind of in the almost like right on the edge of the city as you kind of move out into the suburbs, but kind of a little bit of a rough area. So they regularly would get shoplifting calls to this particular Kmart. And he's like, look, we're here all the time. You can come in. I'm like, okay, cool. So I go in and I get to meet the manager, and we're all just, talking, whatever. And he says, do you want a job? I said, oh my gosh, no, this is 45 minutes away from school. And then here I was 2 weeks later working in loss prevention at this Kmart. And so for 3 years of my college experience, I actually would drive 45 minutes, even during the week, weekends, whatever it may be, to do this loss prevention job, which, if you're unfamiliar with that, is both employee loss. So if employees or such are taking money, whatever that may be, but also literal shoplifting by, of course, patrons to the establishment. And I would sit in a little back room with a joystick and watch people on cameras and then go out and stop them. And so through working that job, I think the police officers that I worked with were like, do something different, like go do something bigger than this job, like do, federal law enforcement, whatever it may be, but like we see you somewhere else. So then I picked up political science as my second major and considered going to law school. And then, all of my student affairs people found me and were like, you should really consider this work. And then there I was going towards getting my student affairs degree.
This is the People of Penn State. I'm Paul Clifford. I'm joined today by Christina Parle. She's the co-founder and team lead for Social Responsibility Speaks. I do want to talk about the company you founded, but I'm so fascinated by some of the answers that you've given already. It would be interesting to me to see your research on the road to the college presidency and to see how that road has changed over time, right? From purely academic to those that are interested in fundraising to those that are interested in the student experience. And now it actually seems like a trend towards those who have corporate experience and business experience for the size operations that they are running. Did you see some of those trends in your research?
Yeah. So from what I remember, because it also was, a decade ago, it was very much through the academic, people were coming up through the academic experience, either being faculty previously and or, provost line type. But I would agree with you. I think we are seeing a lot of college and university presidents coming from a business perspective, whether that's internal to higher education or, to your point, corporate and external. And honestly, I've even experienced that in the sorority and fraternity space. A lot of the new CEOs or executive directors that we are seeing leading those nonprofits are people who are coming from a corporate business specific background. I think a lot of it has to do, right, just with the financial state of higher education, of course, and potentially decades and decades of maybe not the best financial practices, of course. But I think that it also just brings a different mindset. And I think any industry can benefit from somebody coming in who's never really done it before and saying, here are all the things that I think we could modify, edit, consider, think about, whatever that may be. So absolutely, I think there's a lot of value. I just hope that we never lose that this is supposed to be an experience for students, right? Where they are growing and developing. And it's great to make the money. It's great to make sure that, all things are in order in the budget, and we're dealing in people, and people deserve to have a real life, healthy, safe experience.
And dealing with people is what you've built your career on, right? Whether it's on the student affairs side, your interest in law enforcement, or the work that you're doing with Social Responsibility Speaks. So let's start with what inspired you to start Social Responsibility Speaks.
Oh, okay. So when I was in grad school, social justice really mattered to me. I think I had a racial awakening in my master's program at Penn State that I just had not experienced in other places. For context, I'm half white and half Black, and I grew up in a majority white family, as my mother was the predominant caregiver for me and the majority of her family. So my racial identity just was not well developed. And to be honest, right, my undergraduate experience didn't provide a lot of experiences for that racial development to occur. However, Penn State hit me like a Mack truck with my identity development, partially because of what we were covering, right, in the content and curriculum in my classes, but also just the environment at Penn State, I think, heightened my awareness of certain issues. I also, of course, am from Missouri. And there was a shooting of a Black man in Missouri as I was entering my experience at Penn State. And there were lots of protests happening at University Park. There were lots of things happening, I think, that were impacting my awareness of even just myself. And so I had gotten really, really interested in inclusive language. Like, how do I use words that say, you are safe with me, I'm going to care about you, I'm not going to judge you, I'm not going to be bad to you, whatever that may be, right? I'm going to create a space via my words where you feel like you belong. So then I wanted to present. I've always been very enamored by speakers, people who can get up in front of a crowd and just talk to a room, because it's part of the reason why I started student affairs. There is a speaker who came, his name's Joshua Frederickberger. I think I'm mispronouncing that. That's terrible. But he came and spoke, and I remember being like I think it was my senior year, sitting in the crowd. I think I'm going to go to law school. And he's like, you need to have a purpose and you need to have a vision. And I'm like, oh my God, that's not law school for me. And so then I'm like, okay, what is this student affairs thing that everybody's been talking about, right? So that had always been of interest to me, to be able to get up and really change people's lives or encourage them to think differently from the front of a room. So I had already started deciding, like, I want to do a presentation or a program or a workshop on inclusive language. So when I started school, or started my first job at Western Carolina University after grad school, I had started writing. Like, what is this going to be? How is this going to shape up? What's going to be the description? What are going to be the learning outcomes? And I remember a good friend of mine, Dr. Takis Wiggin Davis, reading it and being like, this is great. And why should anyone care about inclusive language? It's awesome to have a great concept. And why do people care? Why should people want to do this? So I'm like, okay, now I need to really think about that. And literally, Paul, for 4 years, I sat on that program. I'd come back, I'd add to it, I'd add thoughts, I'd write down notes in my phone, but I really just wasn't able to bring it to fruition for lots of reasons, changes in life and all the things. So in 2020, I had a program accepted at the Association for Fraternal Leadership and Values, AFLV, and I was going to be in person. It's a student sorority and fraternity conference. And so there are 3,000 plus students there, and my program got accepted. And so I got to present my program, Relearning How to Talk to Each Other, all about inclusive language. And that changed my life. The reception of that, the positive feedback of that was amazing. And then I had a friend and colleague who was like, hey, you should come do this on my campus for my chapter presidents. Billy Bolden brought me to Iowa State, and I got to go and speak to the students about the exact same topic, the exact same program, which is wildly different from what it is today. And then I got very, very lucky to pass cross with an individual by the name of Dr. Suzette Walden-Cole. She's my co-founder in Social Responsibility Speaks. And she had some programming that was related to like women of color being in predominantly white sororities, just some different work that she was doing at the international, national level with sororities and fraternities that I got to kind of tap into. Well, then me and Suzette start having weekly meetings every Monday for 2 hours, just talking about life and the world and equity and justice and all these things. And then the unfortunate murder of George Floyd occurred. And that really set us on a trajectory of need, right? There was a high need from individuals, groups, organizations, campuses to be doing equity, inclusion, justice, belonging work. And so that was like March of 2020. And then we did the LLC for Social Responsibility Speaks by November of 2020, and have picked up a third partner, Amanda Florence Garcia Goodenough, and a full team, and the rest is history, I guess.
That's amazing. It's an amazing story from a number of different angles. One, the need that you saw in the marketplace and how your company could fill that need. That Penn State was an inspiration behind this cultural awakening for you, and ultimately was kind of planting the seeds for the work that you're doing today. What are some of the services that your organization provides? Who's your target audience? Is it Fortune 500 companies? Is it colleges and universities? Is it everything in between?
Yeah. Earlier, and you caught me when I said it, we deal in people. So we will work with anyone, right? I will work with healthcare. I will work with tech. I will work with BIC lighters. I will work with the college students at Penn State. We even work with K through 12 at times, right? So we literally work with any industry. That works for us, because if you deal in people, we are happy to help. So I think that is something important that we always want to name for folks. Now, to be clear, we got our start in higher ed, and even more specifically, we work heavily with sororities and fraternities, but we've worked with Microsoft Desk, we've worked with BIC, we've worked with Flywire, we've worked with all kinds of different companies and nonprofits too. So that part is really, really cool. So right now, one of my favorite clients that I have is a bankruptcy group. It is a group of trustees who do work related to bankruptcy. And it's like their own professional association. And we are working with them to think about how can they make the bankruptcy process more accepting, more inclusive, more thoughtful, more mindful. And that part has been really cool. Services wise, a lot of what we do is in the educational programming space, right? So come in for 90 minutes, half day, full day, 2 days, whatever you need, but we will come in and train your people. I always tell folks I'm definitely not a motivational speaker. We identify as educators, right? That's really our focus. And it's not class. I don't tell people they need to raise their hand, but we are there to help you really raise your consciousness and awareness, and then hopefully turn that into action. We also do coaching and consulting, right? So we can do one-off, hey, this situation occurred and we need support and help in this area, or long-term, put you on a retainer for a year and give you 10 hours a month where you can call us at any time and say, hey, we need to talk through this thing. We also do full-blown comprehensive reviews. So if you've got policies, practices, procedures, traditions, events, programs, position descriptions, whatever it is, we can come in and say, okay, we'll read through all of these things and then provide you recommendations and options of things to implement in order to make your spaces more equitable and inclusive. We also have a climate, culture, and demographic assessment, which we've done with nonprofits, students, staff, whatever it may be, where we essentially do an assessment of the experiences of the people in your organization or company. And then we provide the results, we provide themes, we provide recommendations. So those are the big things that we do. The only thing that we haven't talked about in side of the business that we are growing is our accountability side of the house. So because myself and Suzette both come from higher education and more specifically student conduct, and Amanda comes from a hate and bias response perspective, as she worked there for many years, in that area for many years, we do like student org investigations, comprehensive reviews for conduct offices, hate and bias related offices, all of those kinds of things as well.
So it's interesting to me as I think about your work and kind of the tragedy with George Floyd and the juxtaposition between the work that you're doing today and your interest in law enforcement. How have you reconciled those? Because you're doing work that's addressing structural racism, unconscious bias, right? All of those things that I think are elements that our law enforcement struggles with.
Sure.
So you have a unique perspective on both sides of that. How have you wrestled with that topic?
I think this is such an interesting area, because even thinking about, Paul, when I worked in loss prevention, thinking about even loss prevention uses some of the tactics that we see in policing related efforts, like concerns around profiling, concerns around, targeting people based on identity, whatever that may be. And I always tell people, part of the reason why I do justice and equity work is because I remember a time in my life when I too was problematic. We live in a culture where a lot of people act like you can't evolve, you can't learn. And that is wholeheartedly not true. Who I was 10 years ago, 15 years ago is a totally different person. And to be clear, I hope the person I am a week from now is a different person. I hope I am always growing and evolving over time. And so I think my interest as a younger individual, the work that I did as a younger individual, 100% informs the conversations that I have today. So when someone comes to me today and says, actually, law enforcement is great, and I don't think there are any issues, and we shouldn't be having these conversations around Black Lives Matter or whatever the comment may be, I'm able to give them grace in a way that others maybe wouldn't be able to. Because I remember a time when I believed that you could pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I was raised by an immigrant father who came here from St. Lucia and Trinidad, or he's St. Lucian Trinidadian and came here from St. Lucia. So I grew up in that mindset of like, if I can do it, anybody can do it. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps and you will make it. And today I know that's not true. But because I experienced that, learned that, and now unlearned that, I am so much better positioned to support others in their own growth and development.
Well, that answer right there is rooted in accountability, right? I recognize who I was as my younger me. I own that. And yet I have enough cultural humility to know that I'm on a journey and I can grow in this space to be something that's different and hopefully better, right? Than where I started. I mean, that's you're walking the walk here.
Yeah.
When I think about when you launched your company, kind of at the height of interest in diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging work, right? Certainly, it's been part of our kind of corporate vernacular for decades, and yet there was a renewed emphasis. People talked about the moment that we're living in, right? And this moment where the opportunity to change. And you fast forward to where we are today, where you see legislation in Texas and in Florida, virtually trying to eliminate these kind of efforts on college campuses, in local governments, and anything that's publicly sponsored.
Yeah.
Give us kind of a lay of the land of where we are right now in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and how that's being embraced around the country.
I think we're at a pivotal time, right? I think we are at a transitional time, a transformative time, if we allow it to be. I think right now we are living in probably one of the most polarized societies that have existed, right, in our history. What I want to be clear about is I think the ideologies, the feelings, the thoughts, whatever, those have always existed. However, there's one side that has now gained a voice, is now being heard, is now being listened to, whereas before it was kind of just this other side. And now that I think people are expecting that your spaces are equitable, that your spaces are inclusive, that your spaces create a sense of belonging, that's why we are experiencing this severe juxtaposition, right, of just difference, frustration, infighting, violence, right, really harmful behavior in a lot of ways. And so I think that all of these things have existed, but because one side, the oppressed, the marginalized side, has been given voice, that's why we are seeing this polarization in a lot of ways. I truly believe that this work, equity and justice work, is not political. As we always share with our audiences, this work has been politicized to maintain a system of power and control by those who are the most privileged of us. And so I think I want to be really clear about that, because I think so often it's like, whoa, we were in 2020 and everybody was like awake and wanted to do these things. And then now we're here. And how did we get here? This America that we are living in is the America that we've always lived in. There's just, again, an opportunity. People have a platform in a very different way. So when we think about 2020, people were isolated. People were forced to sit in front of televisions and watch the horrible, horrific things that are happening. Now we live in a society where misinformation and disinformation is on the rise. And social media is a beautiful tool and is not being utilized well in a lot of ways. So thinking about my work, I don't know that the demand has lessened. However, we have people who are just literally restricted from talking about it altogether. You know, we've been in spaces and places where people have said, hey, in order to keep my job, in order to do all these things, you can't say XYZ, right? And that is such a sad space and place to be in, because thinking about the state of Texas or the state of Florida, like Black and brown students still go there. Black and brown people still live there. Queer people, disabled people, people who are living in poverty, like all of those people still live there. And right now are watching from their televisions or watching from, you know, their politicians, hearing it, experiencing it, that like, you don't belong. And what a sad space and place to be in, especially when we say as a country that mental health is an issue. Because if I had to sit back and watch somebody tell me how terrible my experience is, or that it doesn't matter, that my history doesn't matter, that it's not important or it's not real, my mental health is taking a hit. And so when we think about mental health, if that is really important, we have to be willing to center justice and equity work.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about is so true, right? It's nothing has really changed in our country, right? With the possible exception of less subtlety, yes. Right? I mean, I think that there is a renewed empowerment on both sides of this issue for people to express their thoughts and feelings on it, and it's led to, you know, conflict and polarization, and yet, you know, with any struggle, right, there's hopefully growth that comes out of these continued conversations.
And that's exactly why I say pivotal, transformational, if we allow it to be, right? I mean, I think the next year is going to be really telling for our country as people, whatever that may be, of just like how we navigate this conflict that I think we are having, and how we continue to engage both on an individual level, right, but on an organizational level, a cultural level. And so I think I have seen a lot of organizations that maybe even weren't engaging in equity and justice work in 2020 start to pick it up now, because you've got a generation of humans, right, especially those who are just entering the workforce, predominantly Generation Z. This is the most ethnically and racially diverse generation we've ever experienced. They are more comfortable with social issues related to same-sex marriage. They know more people who use they, them pronouns. They just are a more socially aware, conscious, inclusive, focused on belonging generation. And Generation Alpha that's coming behind them is going to be even more diverse. And when representation, right, seeing myself or someone who looks like me on TV, on stage, in my politics, as my teacher, whatever it may be, as that becomes more important, right, that is such a huge issue for people. And then you've got all these diverse generations. This issue isn't going away at all.
This is the People of Penn State. I'm Paul Clifford. I'm joined by Christina Parle. She is the co-founder and team lead of Social Responsibility Speaks. Christina, if people want to get more information about Social Responsibility Speaks, where would they go to find that?
Yeah, www.srspeaks.com. Or you can, of course, go to our social media accounts. And I would always encourage everyone to follow us on social media. We do a lot of really cool educational content versus like, oh, look at what Social Responsibility Speaks is doing. That's not really the vibe. It's more educational in nature. And our graphic designer and brand specialist, Kylis Coleman, is phenomenal. So I would encourage you to follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and also, of course, check out our website.
And again, it's scrolling on the bottom of the screen if you're watching in YouTube. If you're not, it's srspeaks.com, and you can find more information about Christina and the great work that her team is doing in this space. You talked about standing up and people seeing others that look like them, that represent them. You allowed us back in 2022 to honor you with the Alumni Achievement Award, an opportunity for us to not only recognize your good work, but for you to stand up and represent people like you. Talk about what that award meant to you to be recognized by Penn State.
Probably one of the strangest things. It's so funny. When I got the call, I think I had missed the call and then had to listen to the voicemail and then call Stephanie and other folks back. I think I was taken aback to some extent. My life is really focused on serving others, right? Serving the community, serving people, ensuring that people have what they need. So to be recognized is always an honor and a privilege. And even when I got up to give my speech, right, I think I started out with like, I'm going to do this in the most millennial way ever, and I'm going to read from my phone. But I knew that was an opportunity to also talk about being one of the only. In my experience at Penn State as a Black biracial woman, there just weren't a lot of folks who looked like me. There weren't a lot of folks who that had experiences like I did. I was in a cohort in my master's program of 10 individuals, and I was the only Black individual. There were brown folks, but our experiences are different. I didn't have that in any of my professors. I didn't have it in my workplace other than one or two individuals that were only there for a short period of my time there. So I think it's important for an institution like Penn State to recognize the achievements of all different kinds of folks, especially when those of us who have benefited so much from the experience at Penn State, it's our opportunity to give back. And that was really my focus when I got the award, to be able to say, I made it here, even in times when I wasn't sure if I belonged at an institution like Penn State. Now, looking back, of course, I am wildly aware of all of the privileges and just luckiness, or, that I earned or deserved or gained, or whatever the language may be, at Penn State. But when I was there, it was tough. And I wanted to make that clear in my speech. And so I think that it's important for other young Black biracial women, however they identify, to know, like, you can do it too. That doesn't mean it's not going to be without obstacles. And it doesn't mean that it's potentially obstacles that could completely deter you from getting to where you need to be. So it happened for me. That doesn't mean it's going to happen for everyone, but I want people to be able to see me and say, okay, maybe I could do that one day.
It's funny that you use the word luck, right? It's said that luck is where preparation and opportunity meet,
Yes.
right? And so, yes, while it's okay to believe in luck, don't ignore the hard work it took me to get to this opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Christina,
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was a first generation college student. Like, I went to a small D2 school. Like, I didn't have any contextual knowledge about the history of Penn State. So getting there and people being like, you're going to Penn State. I'm like, yeah, I don't even know how cool it is. Like, then I didn't, but now I do. And it's just like, I don't know. It's such a privilege.
Absolutely. We like to have a little bit of fun at the end of each podcast. I know the topic we talked about was heavy, but I want to ask you just a few quick hitter questions if you're okay with that.
I'm ready.
What was your favorite class at Penn State?
Oh, that's such a good question. Probably my student develop. Oh, that's hard. Peggy Laura taught a class on helping skills, I think was the title of the class. I really liked that one, but my student development, like my intro to student development, that was a good one too.
You called yourself, you're a self-proclaimed TV enthusiast.
Yes.
So what is your all-time favorite TV show? That's part one. And part two is, what are you watching right now? Like, what are you binging?
Yeah, Grey's Anatomy is probably my all-time favorite.
Okay.
That's hard. It's Sons of Anarchy and Grey's Anatomy. I know, very different shows. And right now I am on, this is so dramatic, my third rewatch of Madam Secretary.
Oh, I'm a huge fan.
Big fan
of Madam Secretary. I would have had West Wing and Parks and Rec as my first two all-time favorite.
I love it. I love it.
And we just binged The Bear. So
well,
I'm not.
And I will say, I just watched Ted Lasso.
Oh, yes.
That is a fantastic show.
But mind-blowing. I mean, it's entertaining, fun, and you learn something too, right? Or at least it causes you to self-reflect, right?
Yes, and I need to get back to The Bear. I think I watched 2 episodes of that and need to get back to it.
You need to give it 2 more episodes. Okay. It's worth it. So Season 2 is phenomenal. So
okay.
If you can have dinner with anyone, who would it be and why? And you live in Kansas City, the barbecue capital of the world. Where would you take them?
Oh, no. Well, as an out-of-towner, I'd probably take them to Kansas City Joe's, originally named Oklahoma Joe's, that is like out of the gas station originally. But my favorite place is Rosedale's, which there's only one. It's been there since 1934. Super cool place. But it would be President Obama. Because he changed my life as another, when I talked about representation, to see a biracial individual becoming president and someone who was biracial and raised by a white mother. I campaigned for him at 16. I couldn't even vote. And I was like, yeah, this is the best person ever. And so 100% that is who it would be.
How about your most unusual We Are moment where you recognized another Penn Stater or someone recognized you as a Penn Stater and you shout out "We Are" and they respond with the Penn State?
Okay, I do that a lot. And also, fun fact, if you can see my tattoo, you won't be able to see it specifically, but there's a little heart right here that says, thank you, you're welcome. Because that is my favorite part of the We Are chant. But I think the most unique experiences are when I say "We Are," and then it's just someone who like is wearing Penn State attire but didn't go there. So they don't really know what to say back. Those are always funny moments.
That's funny. Your favorite Penn State sport?
Oh, I'm a big football fan. And it was always really cool to get to go to the football game. So definitely that.
And how about your favorite flavor of creamery ice cream?
Listen, you want to know what is so horrible about this question is I found out I have a dairy allergy in 2021. So even if I came back, I wouldn't be able to eat anything. But if they had a non-dairy option, it would definitely be that.
You know, they've actually looked, this is a fun fact. They get that a lot, and they've actually looked into it. And this is probably the least diversity, equity, and inclusion answer they could give, but it wasn't cost effective for them to produce it. Right now, it's like $7.50 a gallon at the, or a half gallon at the creamery. They probably have to charge over $10 for non-dairy ice cream. So,
oh my gosh,
Christina, it's when alumni like you allow us to pass your story on to other Penn Staters that helps to increase the value of all Penn State degrees. And for that, we're truly grateful. Thanks for being on the People of Penn State.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And I want to thank Vincent Longaro, who is pulling all the strings behind the scenes and makes this show run as smoothly as it does. If you like this episode, I hope that you will subscribe to the People of Penn State podcast in your favorite podcast app of choice. While you're there, go ahead and give us a rating, drop us a review, help us spread the word about the People of Penn State to fellow Penn Staters. If you're a member of the Penn State Alumni Association, thank you for your support. And if you're not, what are you waiting for? Go to our website at alumni.psu.edu today, and you can become a member of the world's largest alumni association. Thank you for listening and all you do for the university, for the glory, and for the future. We are